She was just 3 years old, full of life, giggles, and the kind of curiosity only a child can carry. Victoria Rose Smith had already survived so much in her short life and was finally about to be adopted. But instead of finding safety and love, she met a horrifying end at the hands of the very woman who was supposed to protect her. Ariel Robinson, a former Food Network star, brutally ended Victoria's life behind closed doors. What started as a hopeful journey into a new home turned into one of the most disturbing child abuse cases South Carolina has ever seen.
Victoria Rose Smith entered foster care with her 2 brothers in 2020. She was placed with Jerry and Ariel Robinson, who seemed like a dream match, stable, religious, loving, and even publicly visible. Ariel had recently won Food Network's Worst Cooks in America, Celebrity Edition, and seemed to be riding a wave of fame. Ariel often posted photos of the children, painting a picture of a happy home. Jerry Robinson, too, described himself as Victoria's big teddy bear. But behind that curated social media facade was a different story, one full of silent red flags. Victoria had triggers for Ariel, especially around food. If she didn't eat fast enough or made a mess, it enraged her. On January 13, 2021, Victoria vomited in the car before church. Ariel was furious. Witnesses later testified she said things like, "Girls who make themselves throw up deserve to be cold." At church, people saw Victoria in a bathroom stall, shivering in just a t-shirt and underwear. A church member said she looked up at her with wide blue eyes and said nothing. That silence would soon become permanent. That night, back at home, Jerry Robinson said he saw a bruise on Victoria's lower back. He didn't know where it came from. Ariel went out shopping after church and came home later as if nothing had happened. But inside, the tension was boiling. The next morning, January 14th, Ariel and Jerry were home alone with Victoria while the other children were at school. Jerry claimed he was outside doing yard work, but inside the house, he heard screaming, crying, and Ariel yelling at Victoria to eat. When he came inside later, Jerry said he saw Ariel towering over Victoria, holding a belt. Victoria was bruised and silent. Jerry told Ariel she had gone too far. She gave Victoria a bath and wrapped her in a heated blanket, then sent Jerry to CVS to get Tylenol. By the time he got back, Victoria was swaying, then went limp. Jerry says she looked at him and said, "I love you." His reply? "I love you too. This won't happen again." But it was already too late. They tried CPR. Ariel attempted the Heimlich, called 911, and told first responders Victoria was choking. But the bruises told another story, one that would unravel in front of the entire country. Victoria died that night at the hospital. Her body was covered in severe bruises, including deep purple and black welts on her stomach, legs, and back. One bruise on her abdomen was so large, the coroner scaled it with a ruler in autopsy photos. The coroner ruled the cause of death, multiple blunt force injuries. Victoria had been beaten to death, not by accident, not in a moment of rage, but by days of escalating abuse that nobody stopped. From the start, Ariel Robinson gave conflicting stories. She told police that Victoria had bruises from doing the Heimlich, or that her 7-year-old brother had hit her. But her body said otherwise, and so did the DNA on the belt collected from the house. In interviews, Ariel minimized everything. She blamed the child. She said Victoria was manipulative, that she made herself throw up, that she had sensitive skin. But behind her deflections, prosecutors were gathering an overwhelming case. Jerry Robinson, now facing his own charges, decided to testify. He told the court that Ariel often beat Victoria with a belt and a wooden paddle, especially when she didn't eat her food quickly enough. He said he had tried to stop her, but clearly he didn't do enough. Investigators recovered surveillance footage from the church, showing Ariel pulling Victoria roughly by the arm. They also retrieved body cam footage from police on the night. Victoria died, showing Ariel changing her story in real time. When asked directly about the bruises, Ariel said, "The stomach is from me, the legs from her brother. You can't believe him, he's a liar." Her focus wasn't on Victoria. It was on preserving her own image. At trial, photos of Victoria's battered body were shown to the jury. The courtroom fell silent. Medical experts testified that the bruises were consistent with repeated blunt force trauma, not CPR. The older brother couldn't have inflicted those injuries based on his size and strength. The prosecution laid out a timeline of neglect, rage, and final violence. Ariel, once a champion of foster care, had become a monster in hiding, her public image collapsing under the weight of the truth. In May 22, after a 4-day trial, Ariel Robinson was found guilty of homicide by child abuse. The jury deliberated for just over an hour. She was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Jerry Robinson had already pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting and is awaiting final sentencing. His testimony helped convict Ariel, but also raised painful questions. Why didn't he call for help earlier? Why didn't he protect Victoria? The aftermath sparked outrage at South Carolina's Department of Social Services, DSS. How had no one noticed what was happening in that house? The family was being visited monthly via video by DSS, but nothing was done. Victoria's biological relatives released a statement calling for massive DSS reform. They said, "The trauma is unthinkable, but we urge the community to hold that trauma in their hearts and minds." Victoria Rose Smith died in a home that was supposed to save her. Her story is now a national cry for vigilance, accountability, and protection for children whose voices are often ignored until it's too late.
All right, so welcome to another deep dive. And today we're tackling a case that's, well, it's really tough, but it's important.
Yeah, it is. It's the story of Victoria Rose Smith.
Right, Victoria Rose Smith. And we're going to, using everything you sent over, we're going to try to unpack what happened to her.
Absolutely. I think what makes this case so compelling, so disturbing, really, is the contrast between the initial perception and the horrific reality.
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, it seemed like a dream placement for her, right? Jerry and Ariel Robinson, they were, this seemingly stable couple, active in their community. Ariel had even won on the Food Network.
Exactly. And that public persona is a huge part of this story. She really cultivated this image of a happy family, especially on social media. But behind that facade was a very different and very disturbing reality.
Right. And even Jerry, he described himself as Victoria's big teddy bear.
Yeah.
It all just contributes to this sense of deception. So let's start at the beginning.
Okay, sounds good.
Victoria and her two brothers entered foster care in 2020 and were placed with the Robinsons. What can we learn from that initial placement before any warning signs appeared.
Well, the Robinsons, they presented themselves as this, really devout couple, very involved in their community. And of course, Ariel's Food Network fame probably added to this perception that they were a safe, even desirable home for kids.
Right, yeah, makes sense.
And then, of course, her social media presence always showing this picture of a happy family, that would have reinforced that image.
Absolutely. But as we know, that image was tragically misleading.
Yeah.
And the sources you provided point to some specific issues, specifically things that would trigger negative reactions from Ariel towards Victoria, particularly around food.
Yes. The focus on food and eating is a significant red flag. There's information suggesting that if Victoria didn't eat quickly enough, or if she made a mess while eating, it would really set Ariel off.
Oh, wow.
And that kind of intense reaction to such a normal childhood thing,
Right.
It can often be a sign of deeper issues. Issues of control, maybe unrealistic expectations placed on a child.
Yeah, it's like using meal times to exert control.
Exactly.
And then there's that really disturbing incident on January 13th, 2021.
Right.
Victoria got sick in the car on the way to church. And Ariel's response, it was just awful. Saying things like, girls who make themselves throw up deserve to be cold. It's so lacking in empathy.
It is. And it reveals a really disturbing mindset. This wasn't a moment of concern for Victoria.
Right.
It was about punishment.
Yeah.
Inflicting discomfort.
And then at the church, even more heartbreaking, another church member saw Victoria in the bathroom. She was just shivering, only wearing a t-shirt and underwear.
Yeah.
And the way they described her gaze, silent and wide-eyed, it's just chilling.
Absolutely. And I think what's so tragic about that scene is you have this child, clearly in distress, observed by another adult, and yet the situation wasn't fully grasped. That silence, Victoria's silence, it speaks volumes about the fear she must have been experiencing. And it really highlights how easy it is to miss these signs of abuse.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And that same evening, Jerry, he noticed a bruise on Victoria's back, but he didn't seem to know how it got there.
Right. And Ariel, she acted like everything was fine.
Like nothing was wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't that suggest that Jerry was either in denial or maybe even afraid to confront Ariel?
It does. It suggests a reluctance, a failure to fully acknowledge what might be happening to Victoria. And Ariel's behavior just reinforces the idea that she was actively hiding the abuse.
Trying to maintain that facade.
Exactly.
And then, the next morning, January 14th, things took a devastating turn. Jerry said he was outside the house but could hear screaming.
Oh, gosh.
Ariel was yelling at Victoria to eat.
It's just horrifying to think about this child trapped in this environment that was supposed to be safe.
And the fact that Jerry was outside while all this was going on, I mean, did he really not understand how serious it was?
It's hard to say. Maybe he was deliberately avoiding witnessing the abuse.
Yeah.
But his later testimony, as you'll see, suggests that he did have some awareness of Ariel's violent tendencies, but he failed to act.
And when he did finally go back inside, he found Ariel standing over Victoria with a belt. Victoria was already bruised and silent. And even then, Jerry, all he did was tell Ariel that she'd gone too far.
Yeah. And that's crucial. While he acknowledged the abuse in that moment, he didn't remove Victoria from the situation.
Right.
He didn't call for help.
And then they gave her a bath, used a heated blanket, gave her some Tylenol. It's like they were trying to cover up the physical signs of the abuse instead of addressing the real issue.
Exactly. And sadly, that's often what happens.
And then the events that led to Victoria's death, she became limp, and her last words were, "I love you," to Jerry.
Oh, gosh.
And he responded with, "This won't happen again." It's just so inadequate, so tragic.
It is. It really highlights the complete failure to protect this child. In her final moments, despite the fear and pain she must have endured, Victoria still offered love. And Jerry's reply, while maybe intended to comfort her, just underscores his inability to keep her safe.
And then the attempts at CPR, the Heimlich maneuver, Ariel's 911 call, claiming Victoria was choking. It all seems like a desperate attempt to cover up the truth.
Yeah, it does. But the condition of Victoria's body when she got to the hospital, it told a completely different story.
Right. The bruises. So many bruises. Deep purple and black welts covering her stomach, legs, back. One bruise was so large the coroner had to measure it.
And the coroner's report was clear. Victoria's death was the result of multiple blunt force injuries. This was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern of abuse that culminated in this tragedy.
And Ariel's attempts to cover it up are just as disturbing.
Yeah.
First, she blamed the Heimlich, then she even tried to implicate her 7-year-old son. But the evidence contradicted her story. The DNA on the belt matched hers. And her attempts to minimize her actions, saying Victoria was manipulative, that she had sensitive skin, it's just callous.
It really is. It shows a complete lack of remorse, a refusal to take responsibility for her actions.
Yeah. Thankfully, though, Jerry did eventually testify.
Right.
He admitted that Ariel would routinely beat Victoria with a belt and a wooden paddle for not eating fast enough. It paints such a clear picture of the terror this child must have lived in.
His testimony was key in securing Ariel's conviction.
But it also raises questions about his own role in all of this. Why didn't he do more to protect Victoria?
Absolutely. It's a difficult question, but one that has to be asked. The surveillance footage from the church, the body cam footage of Ariel changing her story, it all adds to this picture of her deceit.
And then the trial itself. I can't even imagine what it must have been like to see those photos of Victoria's injuries.
I can't either. It must have been incredibly difficult for everyone involved.
And the jury, they only deliberated for an hour before reaching a guilty verdict. It just shows how strong the evidence was against Ariel.
And the sentence, life in prison without parole.
Right.
It doesn't bring Victoria back, but it does provide a measure of justice.
But this case, it's bigger than just one verdict. It sparked outrage, especially towards the Department of Social Services. They were supposed to be checking on Victoria. They had these monthly video visits, but they didn't catch any of this.
Yeah, and that's really concerning. It points to a potentially massive failure in the system.
And Victoria's biological relatives, they've been vocal about the need for change within DSS. Their statement calling for reform, it's a reminder that this is about more than just a legal case. It's about a system that failed to protect a vulnerable child.
It absolutely is. The fact that Victoria died in a home meant to protect her, it's a tragedy. And it highlights the need for vigilance, for accountability, for better safeguards for children in foster care.
So Victoria's story, it's a reminder that things aren't always what they seem. This perfect family image, it hid a horrifying reality. And it makes you wonder, how often does this happen?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's why it's so important to look beyond the surface.
Right.
There were signs in this case, those silent red flags, the extreme reactions to food, Victoria's withdrawn behavior, the bruises. We have to learn to recognize these signs.
And it makes you think about Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
He knew what was happening, but he didn't do enough to stop it. When is it our responsibility to step in? When we suspect something is wrong, how do we overcome those barriers and take action?
That's a huge question.
It is. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that this case is about so much more than just Ariel Robinson's conviction. It's about systemic failures, it's about individual responsibility, and it's about finding ways to ensure that what happened to Victoria never happens again.
Yeah, and if we want to truly create change, it has to be a multifaceted approach. We need to reform how agencies like DSS operate, maybe with more unannounced visits, better training for caseworkers. But it also goes deeper than that. We need to address the root causes of child abuse, create a culture where reporting is not only encouraged, but acted upon. We need to do better for these kids.
We do?
We owe it to them.
We absolutely do. All right, well, that's it for our deep dive today. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
And we urge you to think about the questions we've raised today. How can we, as individuals and as a society, work to protect vulnerable children? What steps can we take to ensure that their safety and well-being are always prioritized?
These are questions we all need to grapple with.
Absolutely. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks.